Well, it turns out that the fairy tale ending that Bernard Hopkins and many of his fans were hoping for this fight versus Joe Smith Jr. was not meant to be. As Joe Smith Jr., in a pretty gritty fight, all the way up until the stoppage, managed to knock Bernard Hopkins completely out of the ring and basically score a knockout in the eighth round. Landed just a clean overhand right, followed by a left hook, then another right hand, then a final left hook that knocked Hopkins completely through the ropes. And just Hopkins' fall wasn't broken by anything. He just fell pretty much flat on his back. Back of his head appeared to maybe hit the concrete as well. He definitely looked out of it for like a couple of seconds there. He got up. He was complaining about possibly injuring his ankle. Maybe he twisted it like on his way out of the ring or something. But otherwise, I'm not exactly sure how it might have gotten injured. They were icing it after the fact. Up until that point, I mean, I thought Joe Smith was winning the fight fairly handily. I had given Hopkins two of the rounds out of the seven that had been fought, so I had Smith definitely clearly ahead, but Hopkins still wasn't completely out of it. There was a lot of moments in the fight where Hopkins was giving Smith a lot of issues, landing some clean, sharp, effective shots against them. But Smith was largely taking them and outworking Hopkins as well. It seemed like most of Hopkins' work was more in spurts, whereas Smith was pretty consistently working through every round. And so I thought he was consistently, winning most of those rounds. The judges actually had it a split decision at the moment of the stoppage. One judge had Joe Smith winning 69-64, which I think is pretty agreeable. One had it 67-66, which I think is a bit close. And then the third judge, Pat Russell, actually had Hopkins winning 67-66, which I can't really see. You have to be extremely generous and then some to Hopkins in order to give it that score at the time of the stoppage. But just props to Joe Smith. He managed to go in there and get the job done. He wasn't gonna let a man that's old enough to be his dad and then some, get one over on him and take him out. It's like just like you said in the post-fight interview. It was either gonna be his career or Hopkins' career. And Hopkins has had an illustrious career, full of fantastic wins, fantastic paydays. He's pretty much got it made. He can go off into his retirement, enjoy his family, enjoy his life, enjoy his retirement now, enjoy just the rest of his life. Just live a life of leisure, whatever else he wants to do. In his life beyond the sport of boxing. Unfortunately for a lot of athletes, a lot of great athletes, at some point it's going to come to an end because your body just can't be willed to what your mind knows was possible formerly for your body. It's one of the unfortunate effects of just life in general. But Hopkins, he's definitely going to go down as a legend. Fantastic fights all the way through his career. A fantastic long middle rate run, of course. He one of his former victims, John David Jackson, was actually training him for this fight. Definitely helped in the training. He defeated illustrious names like Glenn Johnson, Robert Allen, Segundo Mercado in the rematch of their fight. Fought Roy Jones Jr. back in the day. Of course, he lost that fight. That was, a tough loss for him, but, one that he definitely learned from and improved upon thereafter. Big wins over Oscar De La Hoya, big win over Felix Tito Trinidad, Antonio Tarver, Winky Wright, Kelly Pavlik. Just, the names just go on and on. Tavoris Cloud, Jean Pascal. And even recently, up until pretty much Sergey Kovalev, he was still reigning as one of the top light heavyweights in the world. Only the very best guys were able to defeat him. Chad Dawson, Sergey Kovalev, Joe Calzaghe, a man that retired undefeated, one of the all-time great super middleweights. And he's definitely going to go down in history. He was definitely given Joe Smith Jr. A pretty tough young light heavyweight prospect slash fringe contender at the moment. He was giving him some hell in there. He was giving him a lot of issues. Joe Smith Jr. may go on to become a champion potentially. I think he's still a little bit young, a little bit raw right now. He's a guy that's kind of been a part-time boxer, has a full-time job outside of it, doing construction. But now that he's made a bit of a name for himself with these last two victories, the big knockout victory in the first round over Andre Fonfar, and this eighth round knockout over Bernard Hopkins, he's definitely going to get a lot more opportunities hereafter. Next fight may possibly be a all Long Island showdown versus Shawnee Monahan. Who was actually another guy that was in talks to potentially fight Bernard Hopkins, guy that was in talks to fight Andre Ward and I believe even Adonis Stevenson in this past year as well. Just didn't quite turn out for him. But matchup between those two would be fantastic. Perhaps a matchup between Joe Smith and Jean Pascal maybe in Canada would be a solid way to maybe get Smith a potential shot at Adonis Stevenson. Now that he has a WBC International Light Heavyweight title that he just won versus Hopkins, he definitely has a high ranking in the WBC ranking. So he may get a title opportunity in any one of those circumstances, and I'm sure that he's got a nice couple of big paychecks ahead of him in the next year or so, whether he wins or loses. And of course, if he wins, then hey, sky's the limit. He may be able to get in there with Kovalev or Ward, or anybody else that's coming down the line one of these days. Arthur Beterbiev, some of these other tough young light heavyweight contenders and such. Sullivan Barrera, maybe even, would be I think potentially explosive, fun fight to watch. Of course, especially coming off of Barrera's big knockout victory, upset victory over Vyacheslav Shabransky yesterday. But just props to Joe Smith for a fantastic win over a legend, and props to Bernard Hopkins, proving that he can still do the damn thing even at age 51. An age where a lot of people are just way past it in terms of physicality, not even just in terms of being a professional athlete, but in terms of just life in general. He's definitely somebody to look at as an example of just discipline and healthy living, fitness and discipline, just discipline. Like I said, discipline to his art, to his craft, to his profession, and he's gonna go down as a legend for all of those reasons. Just his sheer longevity in the game. But that's pretty much all I have to say about the main event. I'll cover the two undercard fights in separate videos, so I'll catch you guys on those ones. Peace.